Who in their right mind would want to be a CISO today, especially at a publicly traded company?
Firmly in the regulatory crosshairs with SEC disclosure rules and a growing thicket of privacy and compliance regulations.
Subject to quarterly interrogations by a well-intentioned board that may, or more likely, may not, understand the nature and the nuance of the threat landscape facing the company.
Under constant scrutiny from members of the C-suite, such as the CFO, despite the fact that cyber threats are exponentially increasing, but the budget for security most definitely is not.
Always hearing the sweet, whispering promise of vendors that can make all of this go away. If only you buy the upgraded triple titanium data ingest and support package.
Finding the strength to motivate and manage an underpaid and overworked team to defend against the latest nation-state attacks, while constantly dealing with Dave from accounts clicking on phishing emails from Microsoft.
No wonder the average CISO's employment tenure is measured in months and not years. I'm Chris Pullen, content strategist at CIO.com.
And I'm Robin Das, Executive Director at Strategy at Databricks from Comcast Technology Solutions.
And welcome to Free the CISO, where, over the course of several episodes, we're delving into some of the more unique issues faced by CISOs today, sharing guidance for alleviating these issues, and, hopefully, bring up a little more time for CISOs to take care of themselves and their teams, all while improving security and compliance. We're exploring the CISO's relationship with various groups across the organization, both internal and external, and have covered the regulatory challenge and the impact of compliance on security, as well as the board of directors and the board meetings that are now an essential part of any CISO's calendar. What are we covering in this episode, Robin?
Thanks, Chris. This week is where things are going to start to get juicy as we focus on two of the most important things in the corporate world, money and power. And does the CISO have enough of either? When it comes to money, even though the threats an organization faces continue to grow faster and faster, the days of double-digit budget increases might be over as security budgets slow due to macroeconomic uncertainty. And as for power, well, according to a report by Heidrick & Struggles, only 5% of CISOs report into the CEO, but in the humble opinion of the CISO, 43% of them say they should report directly to the CEO. Is this just the usual corporate jockeying for getting ahead in the business world, or is something larger at play? And is this somehow related to questions about money and more specifically funding? And when looking for someone who had been subjected to the annual budgetary trial by fire and lived to tell the tale, hoping that they could share tales of the strange rites and rituals performed by these high priests of finance, which brought me to the door of Omar Khawaja, who leads Databricks' field security practice and teaches at Carnegie Mellon. Hi, Omar. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Robin. Pleasure to be on.
So if I look at cyber attacks and threats, DDoS attacks more than doubled 2022 to 2023, ransomware attacks up 50%, with the payments exceeding more than $1 billion, the cost of a data breach up 10%. Why aren't the budgets for cybersecurity increasing at least by 50% year over year?
For a variety of reasons. One is that if the budgets of cybersecurity doubled or every department doubled whenever external forces increased in intensity or frequency, the only way for organizations to do that affordably is if somehow their bottom lines, their profit margins were increasing, their revenue was increasing, they'd have to have more on the bottom line to be able to then divvy up to the cyber teams. That's one reason. The other reason is that as these attacks happen, organizations aren't able to translate that into real business impact and real business risk. So if I go to my boss and say, hey, we have this many more threats or this many more vulnerabilities, they don't really understand what to do with that. They don't quite know how to synthesize that into, as a result of this is the business impact or the potential business impact, and this much greater of an investment would now all of a sudden be worth making. So that translation function is missing, because when we talk about DDoS attacks and the number of attacks or the bandwidth of attacks or the OSI layer of the attacks, we're typically just speaking the language of technology and of cyber, we have to be able to speak the language of the business and of the particular organization or enterprise that we're in. And until we do that translation, our sort of quest for more budget as a result of increasing threats is going to continue to end in vain.
And so, why do you think there is that disconnection of a translation? I mean, presumably CISOs do want more budget. They do want to create sort of safer organizations. So, where does that translation break down sort of in your mind?
I think a big reason for that breakdown, Robin, is that CISOs, most of us CISOs have grown up as technologists. Maybe we came from the infrastructure side or the network side or the application side. And we tend to be technology centric. We tend to be ethnocentric, which means we're focusing on our space. We don't really take as much of a view of what does my audience care about? What does the business care about? What does this do to the larger strategy of the enterprise that I'm here to serve? And we sort of take this approach as I hear CISOs complain about not being able to get the budgets that they are desirous of getting and the increases that they think are owed to them, is that they take more of this approach of, this is what I deserve. And it's almost a sense of entitlement. And sometimes it feels like they're thinking that the business and the larger organization exists to serve them and their need. And the whole reason the enterprise exists is to have a strong security program. Unfortunately, that's not the case in the vast majority of organizations. Unless you happen to be working for a security company, the rest of the organizations out there, their mission, their objective is not security. Security simply is a function that supports the mission, supports the strategy, helps you achieve the vision of the organization. And unless people connected to the mission, vision, strategy of the organization, it doesn't quite work.
Do you think it's almost like this dual mission, right? Like you sort of said something interesting about, the business has sort of a mission and objective. Is it almost that, maybe some of the CISOs have come from, very mission objective, backgrounds, but the mission is, keep the thing safe at all costs?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like that is, security professionals are appalled when they go to the business and say, if you don't do this, then we're going to have a breach, we're going to have an incident. And the business doesn't immediately respond with a sense of heightened concern as if tragedy is imminent. And so, and it's because the business doesn't feel the same level of concern that the security person does. It's because the security team and the security leader is often so focused on their mission that they forget that they're not there to serve the security mission. They're actually there to serve the business's mission. So I'll give you an example. I had taken over a group of hospitals as the CISO, and I went to the institute heads of the hospital system with about 12, 13 hospitals. And I'd said to them, hey, we should, you're missing a lot of controls and a lot of technology. And I spouted off a bunch of 3-letter and 4-letter acronyms thinking I'm really smart. And I said, because you don't have these in place, there's a good chance that we could be victims of a data breach. And they looked at me and they said, well, we don't really care about data breaches because we're here to save lives. And we've got plenty of gaps in terms of our resources and facilities and capabilities that we need to address in order to do better at this core mission of saving lives and keeping people healthy. And I said, but you don't understand, like, how can we not have DLP and how can we not have SSL decryption and how can we not have a SIM and on and on. And they just looked at me like I came from another planet. And so I went away and I spent a few months then talking to a bunch of doctors to better understand the mission and what it was that they did. And what I realized is I was trying to convince them that they should care about something that they don't already care about. And that's typically not a great strategy when you're trying to convince someone of something to do. it's better to align to something they already care about versus trying to tell them what they should care about. And then something called ransomware started to happen. This is maybe about 5, 6, 8 years ago when ransomware still felt new. And I went back to them and I said, hey, there's this thing that's happening. And as a result of this, systems are going to be shut down, and it's going to disrupt and erode your ability to deliver care to patients. And they immediately looked at me and they said, Omar, what the hell? That's not good. We can't have any of these systems down. We can't have the EMR down. We can't have our e-prescribe down. We can't have no access to our diagnostic machines and our labs and so on. What are you going to do about that? And so now I'd found something that they did care about. They did care about something that would, I didn't make it about ransomware. I made it about the disruption of the clinician's ability to deliver care. That's something they care about. And they immediately said, you need to put a plan together, tell us how much money you need, and we'll figure out how to get it approved. And I got tens of millions of dollars approved to go do that, because now I came in not saying I need a whole bunch of security tools, which when the business hears it, they think of it as Omar's just asking for a bunch of toys for himself. Versus I came in and I said, here's a specific business need that I am going to enable and help with. And they were very excited to support that.
Like, how do you think about that more generally? So not necessarily a hospital, but, more in the world of business. Is it just sort of the revenue that they would lose through systems being shut down? Like, sort of, how do you think about that type of discussion to kind of take that loss of life and sort of translate it into a business perspective?
Yeah, what I coach people on is, start with the mission or the vision of the organization, and then translate security and what you do into how it impacts that. So at one point, what I did is we actually had a one-pager that described the strategy and the mission and vision for the entire $26 billion enterprise. So what I did is I took that and with same sort of general visuals, and I created the security strategy. So if you looked at it in a split second, you would feel like the security strategy and the enterprise strategy were the same. But when you look closer, you'd see that the security strategy had the same words, some of the same words, and had some of the same pillars, but it overlaid security into it. So now I'm very literally and visually showing how the security strategy is integrated and aligned with the enterprise strategy. Now, on the one hand, our mission was to create remarkable health experiences, freeing people to be their best. So when I talked about security, I talked about how if we don't have the appropriate amount of security, it could lead to non or unremarkable health experiences. So I would start with the mission vision, see how you can connect to that. And then I would go a little bit deeper and say, what is the strategy of the enterprise? How do we plan to win? How do we plan to succeed? And almost every enterprise these days has a 3-year strategy, a 5-year strategy, 4 business imperatives, 8 business imperatives, a focus 5, some whatever they end up calling it. And so then you have to look at that and say, how am I enabling each of these? Even in my current role, Databricks has 5 pillars to their strategy. So everything I do has to connect to 1, 2, or 3 of those pillars. And if it doesn't, then that says to me, maybe this is important for me, but it's not important for the organization. I need to remove my bias and focus on the things that the enterprise actually cares about. So that would be what I would suggest to folks. So if someone says, if an enterprise says our goal is to expand geographically, okay, well, are there security issues that could slow that down, disrupt the ability of the organization to go geographically? If it happens to be in a regulated industry, yeah, because they're probably going to have conversations with regulators to show that they have strong controls to get their approvals. And if they don't, approvals could be slowed down. So you just have to go through and ask. Now, what's super important is that you don't try to make it seem like security has a role to play when it really doesn't. So in the case of the hospitals, when at the time that physician leadership and the executive said, we don't care about data breaches, I didn't spend the next year annoyed and frustrated and scheming to try to convince them they should care about data breaches. I just walked away and I said, the business doesn't care. It is their business. It is their risk. I am here to serve them. I should just walk away. That's really, really important, is if the business clearly says they don't care about something and you've done a good job explaining it to them, then you walk away, because, the goal is not to serve the risk appetite of the CISO, but to serve the risk appetite of the enterprise.
Do you think there's an element of almost like the boy who cried wolf? The CISO sort of warns about a danger. The board are maybe lukewarm, or the C-suite are maybe lukewarm. The CISO goes maybe and fixes the danger or reduces the risk, and so then nothing happens. So almost like the best outcome in security is something that didn't happen. And so, how do you think about measuring that? Or we didn't get hit with ransomware, so did Omar just spend a bunch of money on tools?
Yeah, I think it's important when there are incidents that happen that we draw lessons from them. So if company X got hit by an incident, I should look at that and say, well, is that something that could happen to us? And if it could happen to us, I use that as an opportunity to say, I need to strengthen my controls. I need to update some of my processes. I need to go assess a couple of things and shore up my perimeter or my partner connections or whatever that lesson is from the particular incident. And if at the end of that, I go through the analysis and say, that type of an incident wouldn't happen here because we have X and Y and Z controls and mechanisms and processes in place, and we validated that they are operating effectively, then I should go back to my governing executive committee or board committee, wherever I report up to say, hey, this incident happened. Many of you likely heard about it in the news. I want to walk you through our analysis of this incident. And if these attackers had pointed to us as their target instead of the victim organization that made the headlines, we want to walk you through what would happen in our organization. So that's then a positive way of showing and affirming that the controls that we've put in place are actually starting to pay off. Having those conversations on a regular basis is really, really important, because you're right, Robin, if nothing happens, you don't get credit. So you have to find opportunities to remind and to show that, yes, we have an effective security program. This is why these incidents are not happening to us.
So using the examples of the attacks that are happening sort of around potentially your industry or to similar companies, and just using it as a teachable moment.
Exactly. The other thing is, if you're leveraging third parties to come in and assess your environment, making sure that you're finding someone that sets the bar high and is working really hard. So this could be something like a compliance assessment. This could be a regulator. This could be, if you're a B2B, a customer coming in and doing a third party assessment of your environment. This could be a red team pen test. Right? Those are things that you can programmatically do instead of just waiting for the incident to show that you have strong controls. You can use those activities to say, hey, the last time we did this, the auditor, the assessor, the customer, the pen tester had 13 findings. This time we only had 8. Last time it took us 6 months to address them. This time it only took us 3 months to address them. Right? So the idea isn't to show that we're perfect, but it is to show that every day we're trying really hard to become slightly less imperfect.
Despite security threats increasing at ever higher rates, I remembered the golden rule. Those that have the gold make the rules. And so the CFO would increasingly balance the financial asks from CISOs with the business metrics that carried the most weight, namely business continuity. Of course, in a for-profit company, ultimately everything should have an ROI. But how do you balance the intangible benefits, i.e., measuring something that never happened, as well as the unpredictable nature of cyber threats, with that need for a quantifiable return? I wanted to understand how to make peace between the two tribes. So naturally, I turned to the ultimate arbiter-in-chief, or more commonly known as the CEO. So I sat down with Jonathan Ram, former CEO of Clarks, to get his opinions. Hi, Jonathan. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Robin. Wonderful to be here with you today.
So a lot of cybersecurity is prevention and defense. And, if there isn't a data breach or a ransomware attack, how do you know you're actually getting value for money? And like, how do you value something that never happened?
Well, I think you just hit it on the head when you said if it hasn't happened, that's a good thing, and that you would take solace in the fact that your organization is protected. One of the things I would say to you, Robin, is every business evolves over time, and the data within the business evolves over time. So let's take a brand that used to sell primarily wholesale, and then made a decision that they were going to increase their direct to consumer business. That's a major shift in the company structure. It's a major shift in the data that company is going to be collecting and the sensitivity of that data. So I think it's important that, as part of strategic intent, that as a company evolves, and their business evolves and the level of data sensitivity evolves, that, the budgets are going to need to be looked at, and probably bottoms up budgeting, right? Or zero-based budgeting, because, if you just continue to do the same things over and over again, but you don't have enough of an insight into how your business has changed, you can leave yourself pretty exposed.
And sort of keying off that point, with that zero-based budgeting, like I think strategic intent made a ton of sense about sort of driving a budget increase. But when you look at these cybersecurity metrics, double-digit CAGRs in like DDoS attacks have doubled, ransomware attacks up 50%. Obviously, cybersecurity budgets don't maybe keep pace at that. But what drives security budget increases in your mind?
It's a great question. And, part of being a CEO or a CFO or a chief legal officer is you hold another title, and that's CWO, Chief Worrying Officer. And the more you read, you just have to pick up the newspaper on a daily basis and then understand exactly how disruptive, something like a breach can be to your business. Those are the kinds of things that, I don't know what you need to be convinced of that this is an area of great importance. And again, anybody in a C-suite position who's not aware, certainly I would highly, highly encourage that the company brings in some outside consultants or some trainers to really inform what the challenges are, that are out there and what the implications can be. It's just incumbent upon anybody at a senior level to understand it and the risk. And, anybody in the C-suite, any board member should certainly understand it.
And so, again, great points. But then thinking about the risk, like sort of, are there any, standard metrics, any sort of ROI metrics, maybe like a business continuity, or sort of revenue loss that you think about as the way to assess risk, or the sort of, or the measurement of whether things are getting safer or not?
Yes. I mean, at the end of the day, the business continuity side of things is something most organizations, have in place. But in some cases, it might not tie to the cybersecurity part of the business or the cyber risk associated with your business. You always know that if you have an electrical fault in your distribution center and your distribution center is shut down for a day in the height of your shipping season, you can calculate exactly what the potential lost revenue is, by hour. Not only the people, the fact that you're paying people to do something that they can't execute on, but your ability to invoice. If you can't ship, you can't invoice. And I think it's the same kind of thing that you would have to take into account, for every moment that you have a cyber threat to your organization. Those same types of financial metrics, certainly apply. It's time and your ability to conduct business. And I think it's as simple as that.
It's actually, it's interesting to kind of hear sort of the voice from the C-suite to actually say, yes, business continuity is the metric that does matter. I think I've seen it sort of mentioned, and then sometimes there's kind of theoretical like cost of breaches, but it's interesting to know that like, something tangible, like, we have people standing around getting paid do not do anything, like, is in your mind sort of the clearest and sort of simplest risk metric?
Well, there's that. And again, if you think about the fact that, you as an organization, if you're shipping product, and you're unable to ship it in the timeline that your customer has asked you, there's all sorts of other financial risks like chargebacks, product cancellations, just the quality of the relationship you have with the customer. I mean, all those things are very, very real.
How do you arbitrate between sort of the wants of the CISO that, could probably always spend more on security versus like the CFO that's probably wanting to spend not maybe less, but is trying to sort of rein in the spend? Like, was it again that data driven approach? Was it a standard set of KPIs? Like, how did you sort of arbitrate?
Let me put it to you this way. I would always ask for a risk assessment. And in some cases, Robin, what we would do is we would go out and bring in a outside party to understand how vulnerable we were to cyber risk. And, they would come back with an assessment as to, what the quality of our protection was, how easy it was to break through, and provide us with, an unbiased view of what the risk looked like for our organization. And I've gone through those types of scenarios many a time, and with varying degrees of risk. And then you ultimately sit there and say, well, the data, if the data were to get out, what would be the ultimate risk to the organization, risk to our customers, risk to our consumers, and then we would make the appropriate decision. But there's always going to be a trade-off, without a doubt.
Thank you. And so, I guess the approach then was almost like this sort of unbiased third party to kind of play the arbiter role of understanding where your risks were and what your vulnerabilities were.
Well, what I would say to you, Robin, is less about being an arbiter, but more about, giving us another set of eyes, right?
Right.
You just never want to be too comfortable and, too complacent. And I'm not suggesting for a second that anybody in an organization I work with or for, was complacent, but, there's nothing like getting that third party view to ensure that you're anticipating as much as you possibly can. This is something, you're very well vested in this area, and that, this is changing minute to minute. And in order to stay ahead of the curve, it is definitely recommended that you invest in it. And, if it's just your own people doing the work, you're going to get what you get. But when you bring in somebody to assist you, you might get a perspective that surprises everybody.
That's great. And then sort of maybe shifting gears, I was seeing a lot of interesting sort of surveys and about reporting structure, and maybe sometimes form follows function. But there's a lot of CISOs that would prefer to report directly into the CEO versus the CIO. So, crazy question, but is this just a power grab, or do you think there was more at play?
I don't think it's a power grab. And once again, every organization is different, but, don't you need to reflect on the corporate culture first and foremost and ask yourself, why would somebody be concerned about the reporting lines?
Right.
At the end of the day, if everybody clearly has accessibility to the CEO, to the board, as the case may be, it's an approachable, it's a transparent organization. I don't think that's as big an issue, as ensuring, again, that the corporate culture is such that, everybody understands that, cybersecurity has to be at the forefront of many of the decisions that get made, and ensuring that there is a route in to whether it's the CEO, whether it's the CIO, whether it's the CFO, or whether it's legal, that there's comfort to know who to go to, and that everybody feels as though they all have their skin in the game, because ultimately, what you don't want to have happen is the passing of blame or fault when, God forbid, something does happen.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So, Chris, when you take a step back and think about what roles and responsibilities the CISO and the CFO play in an organization, they should be natural allies. They both have their own highly technical and intimidating languages, are highly visible in the organization, and both are under significant pressure to deliver in their own ways. They carry the fate of their companies in their hands. With so much in common, it should be possible for them to find common ground.
So what is that common ground? And how does it help free the CISO?
So, while those hypothetical cost of a breach or legal penalties make for compelling numbers to a security team, the numbers that carry the most weight for the CFO are the ones in a P&L. Finance are inherently cynical, and so when a CISO asks for more, if they can first demonstrate some offsetting savings, for example, in analyst hours or by retiring legacy tools with new technologies or solutions, it is a great way for a CISO to create credibility and maybe even trust.
While that sounds great in theory, in practice, when the CISO says, "Show me the money," and the CFO responds with, "Show me the savings," how can they possibly do that?
Well, from what we heard, it all comes back to data and having evidence-based trackable metrics. As a former, or maybe reformed finance guy, finance is not afraid of math and they love to dig into the numbers. If you can find a way to free the data from legacy security platforms and make it transparent and accessible, it can be analyzed by both security teams and, with a little bit of guidance, finance as well. As the old saying goes, give a CFO a fish and they'll say, "Robin, this is a budget meeting. Why did you just give me a fish?" But teach the CFO how to fish. With a dashboard of security metrics, you'll keep them, maybe occupied long enough, at least not to look too closely at your budget.
I love the analogy, Robin. Now that we've covered regulations, the board, and now the C-suite, in our next episode of Free the CISO, we will be getting to the next layer down and looking at the CISO's team. Within their security organization, is the CISO managing or being managed? With all the other things the CISO has to deal with, how can they make sure the ways in which their teams are solving problems aren't actually making them less safe?
Thanks for listening to Free the CISO, a podcast by DataB from Comcast Technology Solutions. Stay tuned for our next episode on CIO.com, the number one resource serving the evolving, challenging, and demanding role of the Chief Information Officer. CIO.com provides these important decision makers with the information they need to lead their organizations into the digital-first age. The views and opinions expressed by the participants are their own and do not reflect any official policy or position of Comcast.